The blizzard hit so fast that Amelia Edwards barely had time to register the change in the sky before the world turned white and howling around her. And by then, it was already too late to turn back toward Miles City, Montana. She had been foolish to venture out alone, but the letter she carried in her satchel had seemed urgent enough to warrant the risk. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow living 3 miles outside of town, needed medicine for her persistent cough, and Amelia had volunteered to make the delivery. It was December of 1884, and the winter had been mild so far. She had grown complacent, trusting the clear morning sky without considering how quickly weather could turn in Montana territory. The wind tore at her cloak, and her horse whinnied nervously beneath her, stepping sideways as snow began to accumulate rapidly on the frozen ground. Amelia tried to orient herself, but the familiar landmarks had vanished behind curtains of white. The road had disappeared entirely, and panic began to claw at her chest. She had to find shelter. Freezing to death alone on the prairie was not how she intended to end her 22 years of life. Through the screaming wind, she thought she glimpsed a darker shape ahead. A building, perhaps, or at least a stand of trees that might offer some protection. She urged her horse forward, leaning low against his neck to shield her face from the stinging snow. The shape solidified as she drew closer, revealing itself to be a small cabin, sturdy and square with smoke rising from its chimney. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she nearly wept. Someone was home. She dismounted clumsily, her fingers already numb despite her gloves, and led her horse toward what appeared to be a small lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. Before she could reach it, the cabin door swung open, and a tall figure emerged, moving quickly toward her through the storm. "Here, let me help you," a man's voice called out, strong and steady despite the wind. He took the reins from her frozen hands and guided her horse into the shelter, then gripped her elbow firmly and steered her toward the cabin door. She stumbled inside gratefully, and he followed, slamming the door shut against the howling wind. The sudden silence was almost shocking. Amelia stood dripping on the rough wooden floor, her whole body shaking, as warmth from the fireplace began to seep into her bones. She looked up at her rescuer and found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. Recognition struck them both simultaneously. "Miss Edwards," he said, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "Mr. Walker," she replied, equally stunned. Fletcher Walker stood before her, water dripping from his dark hair, his wool shirt damp from the brief moments he had spent outside. He was the ranch foreman at the Double C Ranch, one of the largest cattle operations near Miles City, and she knew him by sight and reputation, though they had never been properly introduced. What she did know about Fletcher Walker was that he was honest, hardworking, and well-respected throughout the territory. He was perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with strong features and capable hands. He was also, according to town gossip, uncommonly literate for a cowboy, often seen reading books during his rare visits to town. "You are half frozen," he said, his concern evident. "Come closer to the fire." He pulled a chair nearer to the hearth, and she sank into it gratefully, her legs trembling with cold and relief. He disappeared for a moment, then returned with a thick blanket that he draped around her shoulders. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "What were you doing out there?" he asked, crouching down to add more wood to the fire. "That storm came up fast, but you should have been able to see it building if you had been watching the sky." "I was delivering medicine," she said, clutching the blanket tighter. "To Mrs. Henderson. I was not paying enough attention, I suppose." By the time I realized how bad it was getting, I was already too far from town to turn back safely. He shook his head but did not chastise her further. Mrs. Henderson lives another mile west of here. You would never have made it in this. That storm is going to rage for hours, maybe longer. You will have to stay here until it passes." The impropriety of the situation was not lost on either of them. An unmarried woman, alone with an unmarried man, trapped together by circumstance. It would cause talk if anyone found out, but staying alive took precedence over reputation. "I appreciate your hospitality," Amelia said formally. "I apologize for the imposition." "No apology needed," Fletcher replied, standing up. "I would not turn away a dog in weather like this, much less a person. Are you hungry? I have stew." Her stomach answered before she could, rumbling audibly. She felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment, but he simply smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "I will take that as a yes," he said. He moved to the stove and ladled thick stew into a bowl, then handed it to her along with a spoon. The first bite was heaven, warm and savory, seasoned with herbs she could not quite identify. She ate ravenously, too hungry to maintain proper decorum. Fletcher filled his own bowl and sat in the other chair near the fire. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes, the storm howling outside like a living thing. "This is very good," Amelia said finally, scraping the last bits from her bowl. "Thank you. Cooking for yourself teaches you quickly, or you starve eating your own terrible food," he said with a slight smile. "You live here alone, most of the time. This is line camp for the Double C. During calving season or roundup, other hands stay here too, but in winter, it is usually just me, checking on the cattle, making sure none get trapped in ravines or wander too far." She looked around the cabin with fresh eyes. It was small but well-maintained, with a neat bunk against one wall, a table and 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies and several books, and the fireplace that was currently saving her life. Everything was orderly and clean, which spoke well of Fletcher's character. "I suppose I am keeping you from your work," she said. "The work will wait. The cattle know how to weather a storm better than most people do. They will find shelter and hunker down until it passes. There is nothing I could do for them right now anyway, except freeze to death trying." The wind rattled the door, emphasizing his point. Amelia shuddered, realizing how close she had come to that very fate. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "If I had not seen your cabin, I would have frozen out there." "Then I am glad you saw it," Fletcher replied, his blue eyes steady on hers. "And glad I was here." Something in his tone made her heart skip, but she pushed the feeling aside. She was simply grateful and overwrought from her ordeal, nothing more. As the afternoon wore on, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to intensify, the wind screaming like a wounded animal. Fletcher hung her wet cloak near the fire to dry and offered her a dry shirt to change into, turning his back politely while she switched out her damp blouse for his clothing. The shirt was far too large, hanging nearly to her knees, and smelled faintly of wood smoke and soap. She found the scent oddly comforting. "You can have the bunk," Fletcher said, not turning around until she told him she was decent. "I will sleep in the chair." "I cannot take your bed," she protested. "You can and you will," he said firmly. "I have slept in worse places than a chair by a warm fire." She wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was creeping over her, the warmth and food and the aftermath of fear combining to make her eyelids heavy. She nodded reluctantly. "Try to rest," Fletcher said gently. "You have had quite a shock today." She lay down on the bunk, pulling the rough blanket over herself, and watched the firelight dance across the ceiling. Fletcher settled into his chair with one of his books, reading by the light of a lantern. The domestic scene felt strangely intimate, and Amelia found herself wondering about this quiet man who had saved her life. She must have dozed, because when she opened her eyes again, the light had changed. The storm still raged outside, but inside the cabin, shadows had lengthened. Fletcher was no longer reading but was instead preparing more food, moving quietly to avoid disturbing her. "I apologize," she said, sitting up. "I did not mean to sleep so long." "You needed it," he replied without turning. "How do you feel?" "Better." "Warmer." She stood and moved closer to the fire, running her fingers through her hair which had come loose from its pins. "What time is it?" "Near evening. The storm has not let up. I think we are in for a long night." The reality of their situation settled over her more fully. They would be spending the night together, alone. If word got out, her reputation would be in tatters, but there was nothing to be done about it. Survival mattered more than scandal. "Miss Edwards," Fletcher said, his voice careful, "I want you to know that you are completely safe here. I would never take advantage of this situation or compromise your honor in any way." "I know," she said, and realized she meant it. Despite barely knowing him, she trusted him instinctively. "Thank you for saying so, though." He nodded, looking relieved. "I have been thinking about Mrs. Henderson's medicine. When did she need it by?" "As soon as possible. Her cough has been worsening, and the doctor was concerned about pneumonia. Tomorrow, if the storm breaks, I will ride out with you to deliver it. 2 riders together will be safer than 1 alone, and I know this area well. We can make sure she gets what she needs." "That is very kind of you." "It is the right thing to do," he said simply. They shared another meal as darkness fell completely outside. Fletcher lit more lanterns, pushing back the shadows, and the cabin became a warm bubble of light and safety in the midst of the storm's fury. "May I ask you something?" Amelia said as they sat by the fire after eating. "Of course." "Why do you stay out here alone?" "It must be lonely, especially in winter." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I like the solitude," he said finally, "and I like the work. Being responsible for something bigger than myself, taking care of the land and the animals, it gives me purpose. As for the loneliness, well, I suppose I have grown accustomed to it, and I have books for company." "You enjoy reading?" "Very much. My mother taught me when I was young. She believed education was important even for a boy who would probably spend his life working cattle." He smiled at the memory. "She made me practice my letters every day until I could read anything she put in front of me. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She died when I was 15, but I have never forgotten her lessons." "I am sorry for your loss," Amelia said softly. "Thank you. It was a long time ago, but I still miss her." He looked at Amelia with curiosity. "What about you? What brought you to Miles City?" "Necessity, mostly. My father died 2 years ago, and there was nothing left for me in St. Louis except debts. A friend of my mother's lived here and offered me a position helping at her boarding house. It is honest work, and it has allowed me to support myself." "That must have been difficult, leaving everything you knew." "It was, but also liberating in a way. In St. Louis, I was expected to marry well and be decorative. Here I can be useful." She smiled wryly. "Though I suppose sneaking around in blizzards is taking usefulness a bit too far." Fletcher laughed, a rich, warm sound that made something flutter in Amelia's chest. "Perhaps a little," he agreed. As the evening progressed, they talked more easily, the initial awkwardness fading. Fletcher told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, learning to ride and rope before he could properly read, eventually making his way north to Montana in search of better opportunities. Amelia shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, the balls and parties that had seemed so important then and so frivolous now. "You ever miss it?" Fletcher asked. "That life?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I do not miss being treated like a decorative object, valued only for my appearance or my father's money, which we did not even really have." Here, people value what I can do, what I contribute. That matters more to me than pretty dresses and empty conversations." "That makes sense," Fletcher said. "Though I imagine you could have both if you wanted. Usefulness and pretty dresses. Perhaps, but the dresses seem less important now." The fire had burned low and Fletcher added more wood, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. The wind continued its assault on the cabin, but inside, Amelia felt safer than she had in months. "Miss Edwards," Fletcher said suddenly, his voice different, more hesitant. "There is something I should tell you." She looked at him, surprised by his tone. "What is it?" He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "This is going to sound strange, but I feel I should be honest with you given the circumstances. The truth is, I already knew who you were before today. I mean, I knew more than just your name." "I do not understand." Fletcher stood and went to one of the shelves, retrieving something. When he returned, he held a piece of paper, folded and creased as though it had been opened and read many times. "About 6 months ago I found this," he said, offering it to her. It had blown into the creek near the ranch, caught on some brush. I pulled it out, thinking it might be important to someone. Amelia took the paper, her hands trembling slightly, and unfolded it. Her breath caught as she recognized her own handwriting. It was a letter she had written to her cousin in Denver, describing her new life in Miles City. She had written about her work at the boarding house, about the vast beauty of Montana, about her hopes and dreams for the future. She had also written, in a moment of unguarded honesty, about her loneliness and her desire to find someone who valued her for more than her appearance, someone who would see her as an equal partner rather than a possession. "I should have tried harder to find the owner and return it," Fletcher said, his voice low. "But once I read it, once I read your words, I could not stop thinking about them, about you. I asked around town discreetly and learned who you were. I told myself I would introduce myself properly someday when I had the courage, but I could never quite manage it." Amelia stared at the letter, emotions swirling through her. Embarrassment at having her private thoughts exposed, certainly, but also something else. Something warm and unexpected. "So when you opened the door today," she said slowly, "you knew exactly who I was." "Yes. I am sorry. I should have said something immediately, but I was too surprised to think clearly. Then, as we talked, I kept trying to find the right moment, but there never seemed to be one." He met her eyes, his expression earnest and vulnerable. "I am not trying to make excuses. What I did, keeping your letter, was wrong, but I need you to know that it was not some strange obsession. Your words just resonated with me because I felt the same way. Alone, wanting more, wanting someone who understood." She should have been angry. By all rights, she should have demanded an explanation for why he had not tried harder to return her letter, why he had kept something so personal. But as she looked at him, at the honest shame and hope in his face, she found she could not summon anger. "You should have returned it," she said finally. "But I understand why you did not, and I suppose in a strange way that letter may have saved my life today. If you had not known who I was, you might not have been so quick to help me." "I would have helped anyone," Fletcher said quickly, "I know, but perhaps you would not have been so careful with me, so kind." She folded the letter and held it in her lap. "What did you think when you read it?" "I thought you were brave," he said without hesitation, "and honest, and that you described exactly how I have felt for most of my life. Like I was looking for something real in a world that often seems to value only what is on the surface." The wind howled, rattling the windows, but inside the cabin something had shifted. The air felt charged, electric with possibility. "I have seen you in town," Amelia admitted quietly. "Several times. You always seemed different from the other cowboys, more thoughtful, more present. I noticed you." Fletcher's eyes widened slightly. "You did? Yes. But I thought, well, I assumed you would not be interested in someone like me, a woman working at a boarding house with no family connections or prospects. I thought the same, Fletcher said. That you would never be interested in a cowboy who lives alone in a line camp and smells like horses most of the time. Despite the intensity of the moment, Amelia laughed. You do not smell like horses right now. Well, I did bathe this morning, so that is fortunate timing. They smiled at each other, and Amelia felt something shift in her chest, like a door opening that she had not known was closed. Fletcher, she said, using his given name for the first time. What are you saying exactly? He moved closer, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. I am saying that I have thought about you every day since I found that letter. I am saying that I memorized your words because they mattered to me. I am saying that having you here, talking with you, getting to know you, has been the best day I have had in longer than I can remember, despite the circumstances. He took a breath. I am saying that I have loved you since your letter, Amelia, and meeting you today has only made those feelings stronger. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. That is a very bold confession to make to someone you just met. I know. And if it makes you uncomfortable, I will not mention it again. But we are trapped here together by the storm, and it feels wrong to pretend I do not feel what I feel. I would rather be honest and risk rejection than lie and lose the chance entirely. Amelia set the letter aside and reached out, cupping his face in her hand. His skin was warm, rough with stubble, and very real beneath her palm. You are not going to be rejected, she said softly, because I feel it too, this strange, impossible connection. I cannot explain it, but I feel like I have been waiting for you without knowing I was waiting. Fletcher closed his eyes briefly, leaning into her touch. When he opened them again, they were bright with emotion. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice rough. Yes, she whispered. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she did not want to change her mind. She wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that defied logic or propriety. When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but deepened as they both surrendered to the feeling. His hand came up to tangle in her hair, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. The storm raged outside, but inside, there was only warmth and light and the overwhelming rightness of being in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. I have dreamed of this, he murmured. So have I, though I did not know it until now. They stayed close, wrapped in each other as the fire crackled beside them and the snow continued to fall. Eventually, Fletcher convinced her to sleep again, and this time he lay down beside her on the narrow bunk, holding her close to keep her warm. It was improper, scandalous even, but neither of them cared. They had found something precious and unexpected in the middle of a blizzard, and they were not going to let propriety rob them of this moment. Amelia fell asleep with her head on Fletcher's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and dreamed of a future that suddenly seemed possible. She woke to pale light filtering through the window and the blessed absence of wind. The storm had passed. Fletcher was already up, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. He smiled when he saw her awake. Good morning, he said, bringing her a cup of the strong, hot brew. Good morning. She sat up, taking the coffee gratefully. The storm is over, looks like it. The sun is trying to break through the clouds. We should be able to ride out in an hour or so, once I have checked on your horse and made sure he is fit to travel. Reality came crashing back. They had to leave this warm sanctuary and return to the world, where there would be questions and consequences. Fletcher seemed to read her thoughts. Amelia, he said, sitting beside her. What happened here, what we shared, it was real, At least it was for me. It was real for me too, she assured him. Then we will face whatever comes together. If there is talk, we will weather it. If there are consequences, we will handle them. He took her hand. I meant what I said last night. I love you. I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but I cannot deny what I feel. I love you too, Amelia said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I do not know how it is possible to feel this way about someone so quickly, but I do. Then that is all that matters. They finished their coffee and prepared to leave. Fletcher checked on both horses, pronouncing them ready to travel, and helped Amelia into her now dry cloak. The world outside was transformed, blanketed in white that sparkled in the weak sunlight. It was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. They rode together toward Mrs. Henderson's cabin, Fletcher leading the way through drifts that came up to the horse's knees in places. The journey that would have killed Amelia alone was manageable with Fletcher's knowledge of the land and his steady presence. Mrs. Henderson was overjoyed to see them, worried that no one would be able to reach her after the storm. Amelia delivered the medicine, and they stayed long enough to make sure the elderly woman had adequate firewood and supplies. Fletcher promised to check on her again in a few days. Then came the ride back to Miles City. As they approached the town, Amelia felt tension creeping back into her shoulders. Someone would have noticed her absence. There would be questions. As if summoned by her thoughts, a group of riders appeared, heading toward them. Amelia recognized Thomas Porter, the town sheriff, and several other men who had clearly been forming a search party. "Miss Edwards," Sheriff Porter called out, relief evident in his voice. "We have been worried sick. When you did not return yesterday and then the storm hit, we feared the worst." "I am fine, Sheriff," Amelia said. "I was caught in the storm, but Mr. Walker found me and provided shelter at the line camp." The sheriff's eyes moved between them, assessing. Amelia could see the moment he registered the implications, the overnight stay, the potential scandal. His expression hardened slightly. "I see. Well, we are glad you are safe. We should get you back to town now. Mrs. Winters has been beside herself." Mrs. Winters ran the boarding house where Amelia worked and lived. She was a kind woman, but also a practical one who understood the harsh realities of reputation in a small town. Fletcher dismounted and came to help Amelia down from her horse. His hand lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary, and she knew the men noticed. "Sheriff," Fletcher said, his voice calm and steady, "I want to be clear about what happened. Miss Edwards took shelter at my cabin during the blizzard. She slept in the bunk and I slept in a chair. Nothing improper occurred. I give you my word on that." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Walker, but you know how people talk." "I do," Fletcher said. "Which is why I intend to call on Miss Edwards properly, with Mrs. Winters' permission, and make my intentions clear to everyone." Amelia's heart leapt. He was not going to pretend nothing had happened or distance himself to protect his own reputation. He was going to fight for them. "What exactly are your intentions?" the sheriff asked, though his tone had warmed slightly. "I intend to court her with the goal of marriage if she will have me," Fletcher said clearly, looking at Amelia. "I love her and I want everyone to know it." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then one of the other men, a young ranch hand Amelia recognized from town, let out a low whistle. "Well," Sheriff Porter said, a small smile tugging at his lips, "I suppose that is straightforward enough. Miss Edwards, do you share these feelings?" "I do," Amelia said, lifting her chin. "Very much. Then I suppose congratulations are in order once things are made proper and official." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Come on, let us get you both back to town before anyone else starts spinning wild stories." The ride back to Miles City felt different than any ride Amelia had taken before. Fletcher stayed close to her side, his presence a steady comfort. When they reached the town, a small crowd had gathered, worried neighbors and friends who had been concerned about her disappearance. Mrs. Winters pushed through the crowd, her face creased with worry that transformed into relief when she saw Amelia. "Thank heavens," she breathed, pulling Amelia into a fierce hug. "I thought we had lost you." "I am sorry for worrying you," Amelia said. "The storm came up so fast and I was foolish not to turn back sooner. You are safe, that is what matters, Mrs. Winters pulled back, her sharp eyes taking in Fletcher, who had dismounted and was standing respectfully nearby. "And you are Mr. Walker, I presume, the one who sheltered her?" "Yes, madam," Fletcher said, removing his hat. "Fletcher Walker, I work for the Double C. I know who you are. You have a good reputation." She looked between them, and Amelia could see her quick mind working, assessing the situation. "Come inside, both of you. We need to talk." They followed her into the boarding house, into her private sitting room where she conducted business. She closed the door firmly and turned to face them. "I am going to be blunt," she said. "Amelia, you spent the night alone with a man. In most cases, that would be enough to ruin your reputation completely. However, Mr. Walker is known to be honest and decent, and Sheriff Porter seems to believe nothing untoward happened. Is that correct?" "Yes, madam," Amelia said, feeling her cheeks heat. "Fletcher was a perfect gentleman." "I am glad to hear it. However, perception matters almost as much as truth in a town like this, so I need to know what happens next." She looked at Fletcher. "What are your intentions toward Amelia?" "I intend to court her properly, with your permission and blessing," Fletcher said without hesitation. "And if she will have me, I intend to marry her." Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow. "That is quite a commitment to make after one day." "I know it seems fast," Fletcher said, "but I have admired Miss Edwards for some time, and getting to know her yesterday only confirmed what I already suspected. She is remarkable, and I would be honored if she would allow me to court her." "Amelia," Mrs. Winters turned to her. "How do you feel about this?" "I want it," Amelia said firmly. "I know it is unusual, but I feel certain about this, about him." Mrs. Winters studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. "Young love," she muttered, "always complicating things." But there was warmth in her voice. "Very well. Mr. Walker, you may call on Amelia here at the boarding house under proper supervision. We will do everything correctly and publicly, so that any talk of impropriety dies down quickly. If, after a suitable courtship period, you both still wish to marry, you will have my blessing." "Thank you," Fletcher said, his relief evident. "Do not thank me yet. I have strict rules about courting. Visits must be in the parlor with me or another chaperone present. No unseemly behavior. And Amelia still has her duties here which must come first." "I understand, madam." "Good. Now, Mr. Walker, I think you should go. People are watching, and we need to establish that everything is above board. You may call tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. Fletcher nodded and turned to Amelia. "Until tomorrow, then." "Until tomorrow," she echoed, wishing she could touch him, hold his hand, something. But Mrs. Winters was right. They needed to be careful now. He left, and Amelia sagged slightly, the events of the past day catching up with her all at once. "Sit down before you fall down," Mrs. Winters said, her tone gentler. She poured them both tea from the pot that always seemed to be steeping in her sitting room. "Now, tell me everything. The truth, Amelia. I need to know what really happened." So Amelia told her, leaving out only the kiss and the fact that they had shared the bunk. Those details were private, sacred even, and she wanted to keep them close to her heart. She told Mrs. Winters about the storm, the cabin, the conversations, and about the letter. "He kept your letter," Mrs. Winters said, her expression thoughtful. "That is unusual, some might say inappropriate." "I know. But when he explained it, when I saw how much it meant to him, I could not be angry. He saw me, the real me, before we ever met, and he loved what he saw. That is rather romantic, I suppose, Mrs. Winters admitted, though highly irregular. Still, if he treats you well and his intentions are honorable, I suppose the circumstances of how you met matter less than what you build together. You think people will talk. Of course they will talk. People always talk. But Fletcher Walker has a solid reputation, and you have worked hard to establish yourself here as respectable and responsible. If you conduct your courtship properly, the talk will die down eventually. There may be some who always whisper, but their opinions need not matter to you. Over the following weeks, Fletcher proved himself devoted and consistent. He called every afternoon at 3 o'clock exactly, spending an hour in the boarding house parlor with Amelia while Mrs. Winters or one of the other boarders sat nearby as chaperone. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's habits and histories, their hopes and fears. On Sundays, Fletcher escorted Amelia to church, walking proudly beside her despite the stares and whispers. His message was clear. He was courting her openly and honestly, and he did not care who knew it. Gradually, the town accepted them. It helped that Fletcher was well liked and respected, and that Amelia had built her own reputation for kindness and hard work. The initial scandal faded into interest, and then into acceptance. Fletcher brought her small gifts, wildflowers when he could find them in the snow, a book of poetry he thought she would enjoy, a scarf he had traded for at the general store. Nothing expensive or ostentatious, but each gift was chosen with care and given with love. Amelia found herself falling deeper with each passing day. She loved his quiet strength, his thoughtfulness, the way he listened to her with complete attention. She loved how he made her laugh, how he asked her opinion on things and genuinely cared about her answer. She loved his hands, work roughened and capable, and the way they trembled slightly when he touched her in the chaste, supervised ways that were permitted. Christmas came, and Fletcher gave her a journal, beautiful and leather-bound. "For your thoughts," he said, "so you never have to worry about them blowing away again." She gave him a muffler she had knitted herself, working on it secretly in the evenings. It was not perfect, but he wore it every day, even when it was not quite cold enough to need it. Winter deepened, but for Amelia the world felt bright and full of promise. Mrs. Winters, ever watchful, seemed satisfied with Fletcher's courtship. She told Amelia privately that he was a good man, and that she had her blessing to accept if he proposed. The proposal came in February, on a clear, cold day when the sun turned the snow to diamonds. Fletcher had asked permission to take Amelia for a sleigh ride, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Winters, who sat in the back of the sleigh with a thick blanket and a knowing smile. They rode out toward the line camp where they had first truly met, and when they reached it, Fletcher helped both women down. "I have something I want to show you," he said to Amelia. He led her around to the side of the cabin, and she gasped. There, carved into the wood, were their initials surrounded by a heart. "I did this the day after you left," Fletcher said. "I wanted to mark the place where my life changed, where I found you." "Fletcher," she breathed, touching the carving gently. He took her hands, his blue eyes intense and full of love. "Amelia Edwards, I have loved you since your letter, and I have loved you more with each day we have spent together. You are brilliant and brave and kind, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly despite Mrs. Winters' presence. The older woman cleared her throat pointedly, but she was smiling. "I think we can allow one kiss," she said dryly. "Considering." They were married in April when the snow had finally melted and the prairie was just beginning to green. It was a simple ceremony in the small church in Miles City, but half the town turned out to see it. Amelia wore a dress that Mrs. Winters and the other boarding house women had helped her make, pale blue wool that brought out her eyes. Fletcher wore his best suit, dark and pressed, and he could not stop smiling. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her like he had been waiting his whole life to do it, and the congregation erupted in applause. They spent their first night as husband and wife at the line camp, in the place where their story had truly begun. Fletcher had cleaned and prepared it, bringing in flowers and making the small cabin as comfortable as possible. "I know it is not much," he said, suddenly nervous. "Eventually, I hope to build us a real house, something bigger and better, but for now," she silenced him with a kiss. "It is perfect. This is where we found each other. I cannot imagine a better place to start our marriage." That night, they loved each other with the passion and tenderness that had been building through months of restrained courtship. And afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bunk, Amelia felt more at peace than she had ever been in her life. "I have something for you," Fletcher said, reaching for his discarded shirt and pulling out a folded piece of paper. It was her letter, the one he had found in the creek. "I want you to have it back," he said. "It belongs to you, though if you would allow me, I would like to keep it. As a reminder of how we found each other." "Keep it," she said softly. "It brought us together. It should stay with us." He tucked it carefully back into his shirt pocket close to his heart. The following months were busy ones. Fletcher continued his work at the Double C, but began saving every penny toward building them a home. Amelia continued to work at the boarding house for a time, though Mrs. Winters told her she could leave whenever she wished. "You are family now," Mrs. Winters said, "and you will always have a place here if you need it." In June, they learned that Amelia was pregnant. The joy they felt was overwhelming, and Fletcher became even more determined to build their house before the baby arrived. He worked tirelessly through the summer, with help from friends and fellow ranch hands. The house rose on a piece of land Fletcher had been able to purchase, not far from Miles City, but far enough to feel private and peaceful. It was small but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor with a fireplace that reminded Amelia of the one in the line camp. They moved in just before the first snow of the season, almost exactly a year after the blizzard that had trapped them together. "Full circle," Fletcher said, holding her close as they stood in their new home, watching the first flakes fall outside their window. "The best circle," Amelia agreed. Their son was born in February, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him William, after Fletcher's father, and Fletcher cried when he held him for the first time, overwhelmed with love and wonder. Amelia had never seen him so tender as he was with their son. He would sit for hours with William in his arms, talking to him softly, telling him stories, singing lullabies his own mother had sung. "You are going to spoil him," Amelia teased. "Good," Fletcher said firmly. "He should be spoiled. He should know he is loved every moment of every day." As William grew, Fletcher proved to be a devoted and patient father. He made toys for his son, taught him to ride as soon as he was big enough, read to him every night from the growing collection of books in their home. 2 years after William's birth, Amelia gave birth to twin daughters, Grace and Helen. Fletcher was beside himself with joy, juggling 2 tiny babies with surprising skill for a man used to handling cattle and horses. "3 children," he said one evening when all the babies were finally asleep and he and Amelia had a rare moment of peace. "Can you believe it?" "Barely," Amelia admitted, leaning against him. "Some days I can hardly believe any of this is real, that I am this happy." "I know what you mean," Fletcher said, kissing her temple. Sometimes I wake up and think I must be dreaming, that I will open my eyes and you will be gone. I am not going anywhere, she promised. Life settled into a rhythm that was sometimes exhausting but always fulfilling. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Fletcher and Amelia's love deepened with each passing season. They still visited the line camp occasionally, especially on the anniversary of the blizzard, to remember where it all began. When William was 10, he found the carved initials on the side of the cabin. "What is this?" he asked. Fletcher and Amelia exchanged a look, and then Fletcher told him the story. All of it, including the letter, the blizzard, and the confession. "So you loved Mother before you even met her?" William asked, his eyes wide. "I loved the person she was in that letter," Fletcher said, "and when I met her in person, I loved her even more." "That is very romantic," Grace said, appearing from around the corner with Helen. The twins were 8 now and inseparable. "It is," Amelia agreed, smiling at her daughters. "Your father is the most romantic man I know." "And the luckiest," Fletcher added, "because somehow she chose me too." As the children grew older and eventually began to leave home, pursuing their own dreams and lives, Fletcher and Amelia remained as devoted to each other as ever. They had weathered difficulties together. Hard winters, crop failures, the death of Mrs. Winters, who had become like a mother to Amelia. Through it all, they had each other, and that had been enough. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Amelia back to the line camp one more time. It was no longer used by the ranch. Newer, better camps had been built elsewhere. But the cabin still stood, weathered but solid. Inside, someone had left the old furniture, and Fletcher built a fire in the fireplace while Amelia looked around, remembering. "So much has changed," she said softly. "Not everything," Fletcher replied, coming to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I still love you as much as I did that day, more even if that is possible." "It is possible," Amelia said, turning in his arms to face him, "because I feel the same way. You are the best decision I ever made, Fletcher Walker." "I am pretty sure I did the deciding," he teased. "You confessed." "I decided to accept. Those are different things." He laughed and kissed her, and it felt exactly like it had 25 years ago. Right, perfect, like coming home. They stayed the night in the cabin as they had on their wedding night, making love and talking and watching the fire burn low. And when they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Amelia dreamed of snow and letters and the best blizzard of her life. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, each new generation adding to the family that Fletcher and Amelia had built together. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces gaining lines, but their love never diminishing. When they were both in their 70s, too old to manage the house and land alone, William and his wife moved in with them, insisting it was their turn to take care of their parents. Fletcher and Amelia accepted gratefully, enjoying the bustle of a full house once more. On a cold December evening, Fletcher and Amelia sat by their fireplace, much as they had in the line camp so many years ago. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, both of them staring into the flames. "You remember the blizzard?" Amelia asked softly. "Every detail," Fletcher replied. "The way you looked when you stumbled in, half frozen, how brave you were, how beautiful." "I remember thinking that you were going to save my life," Amelia said. "And you did, but not in the way I expected. You saved so much more than my life that day." "We saved each other," Fletcher corrected gently. "I was just existing before you, Amelia. You made me live." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Fletcher Walker." "I love you too, Amelia Walker. I have loved you since your letter, and I will love you beyond my last breath." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire and listening to the sounds of their family in other parts of the house. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, covering the world in white. "Look," Amelia said, nodding toward the window. "Snow," Fletcher smiled. "Perfect timing." They watched it fall together, remembering another storm, another lifetime, when the snow had trapped them alone and given them the courage to speak their hearts. That blizzard had been a gift, though they had not known it at the time. It had brought them together, given them a story to tell, a foundation to build on. Now, decades later, they still had each other, still had the love that had bloomed in the midst of that wild winter storm. And they knew, with absolute certainty, that they would have each other for whatever time remained. Years later, when both Fletcher and Amelia had passed on peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, their children found the letter while sorting through their father's belongings. It was still folded carefully, kept in a leather pouch that Fletcher had apparently carried with him every day of his life. William read it aloud to his siblings, and they all cried, understanding for the first time the depth of their father's love, the miracle of how their parents had found each other. "We should bury it with them," Grace suggested, but Helen shook her head. "No, they would want us to keep it. To remember that love can find you in the strangest places, in the most unexpected ways. That sometimes all it takes is a blizzard and the courage to speak your heart." So they kept the letter, passing it down through the generations, along with the story of how Fletcher had loved Amelia since her letter, how the snow had trapped them alone, and how a cowboy's confession had changed everything. The line camp eventually collapsed, returning to the earth, but the carved initials remained visible for many years, a testament to love that had endured every storm, every hardship, every challenge. Fletcher and Amelia had built something beautiful together, something that lasted far beyond their own lives. Their great-grandchildren would eventually settle in Miles City, Montana, carrying on the family legacy. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled, they would tell the story of the blizzard that brought their family into being. The story of a found letter, a cowboy's love, and a confession that changed two lives forever. It was a story about fate and choice, about courage and vulnerability, about two people who found each other when they needed each other most. It was a story about love in its purest, most enduring form, and it all began with snow and a letter and 3 simple words: "I've loved you." The tale of Fletcher and Amelia became legend in Miles City, a reminder that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings, and that love, when it is real and true, can weather anything. Their descendants would grow up knowing that they came from a love story, a real one, not prettied up or exaggerated, but simply true. Because Fletcher Walker had loved Amelia Edwards since her letter, and that love had built an empire not of land or wealth, but of family, connection, and enduring devotion. It was everything they had both secretly hoped for when they were young and lonely, and everything they had built together through years of partnership and commitment. Their story ended not with tragedy or separation, but with fulfillment and peace, 2 lives well lived and a love that never faltered. And if there is any better ending than that, it is hard to imagine what it might be. In the end, it was not the storm that mattered, but what it revealed. That love can strike as suddenly and powerfully as lightning, that it can be found in the most unexpected places, and that when you are brave enough to confess your heart, miracles can happen. Fletcher and Amelia knew this truth, lived it every day of their long lives together, and passed it down to all who came after. The snow had trapped them alone, the cowboy had confessed, and love had done the rest, transforming 2 lonely people into a family, a legacy, a story worth telling. And so their story ends where it truly began. In love, in courage, in the simple, profound truth that when you find the right person, you know. You know from a letter, from a glance, from a single conversation in a cabin while a blizzard rages outside. You know, and if you are brave enough to act on that knowing, everything changes. Everything becomes possible. Everything becomes beautiful. Everything becomes home.